Undercover Black CEO orders coffee. One sentence exposes a toxic secret. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into today's story. It was an ordinary morning at the bustling coffee shop in Seattle, the air filled with the comforting aroma of fresh brews. Customers trickled in one by one, grabbing their morning coffee on the way to work. But today, something was different. A man in a simple hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers stepped in quietly. He blended in with the crowd, his face calm, his demeanor unassuming. He wasn't here to draw attention. He approached the counter, ordered a black coffee, and handed over his payment without a second thought. But what no one knew was that this man wasn't just another customer. He owned the entire chain of coffee shops. As he sat down with his coffee, something unusual happened. A young staffer, a woman in her 20s with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, walked up to deliver his drink. She glanced at him for a moment, a slight hesitation in her eyes, and then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't belong here." The words hit him like a slap across the face, freezing him in his seat. It wasn't just the insult. It was the cold, unmistakable tone of someone who thought they were in control. Someone who didn't recognize the person sitting in front of them. A person who owned this very place. His pulse quickened, but he stayed calm, hiding his true identity for now. The woman, unaware of who he really was, placed the coffee on the table and turned to walk away. Her words echoed in his mind. "You don't belong here." It was a simple phrase, but it carried weight, a painful reminder of the bias that existed in this world. He had heard it before, many times, over the years, but it never got easier to hear. He thought about how, even after all his success, he was still being judged based on his appearance, not his accomplishments. He remembered the times in his youth when he had been told he wasn't good enough, not worthy of certain spaces. And now, in this very moment, it was happening again. He looked around the cafe, the normality of it all contrasting sharply with the storm brewing inside him. It was his shop, his business, and yet, here he was, being treated like an outsider. The tension in the air grew thick as he glanced at the staff member again. She was talking to a colleague, her back turned to him. He couldn't help but wonder, was this just an isolated incident, or was it part of a deeper, systemic problem within his own company? He had spent years building this empire, creating opportunities for people of all backgrounds, but now, in his own store, he was reminded of the barriers that still existed. As he sat there, sipping his coffee, he realized that this moment could not be ignored. He had a choice to make, let it slide, or take action. But this time, he wasn't going to stay silent. This was the moment he would change everything. He took out his phone and made the call. "Activate Protocol 6, he said calmly. His assistant, Carla, picked up instantly. "It's ready, sir," she replied. He gave her a nod, though she couldn't see it. He didn't need to raise his voice. He knew what needed to be done. He wasn't just going to be a passive observer in his own company. No, today, he would make sure that this kind of behavior was stamped out, not just here, but everywhere. The coffee shop might have been a small part of his empire, but it was the perfect place to start. Within minutes, the wheels were in motion. He stood up, his voice steady, but with a quiet power behind it. He walked up to the counter where the woman who had insulted him was standing. She looked up at him, still unaware of who he was. "I own this place," he said calmly. "And the next words out of your mouth better be an apology." The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. The other staff members exchanged confused glances, wondering what was going on. And then, the woman realized. The color drained from her face. As she realized she had just insulted the man who was responsible for everything around her. She stammered, trying to apologize, but it was too late. The damage had been done. He didn't need to yell or make a scene. He simply turned to the rest of the staff and said, "This needs to change." Immediately, within the next few moments, the entire team was informed about the protocol that had been set in motion. Staff were pulled aside. The company's internal audit began, and the young woman who had made the comment was swiftly removed from her position. The barista, the assistant manager, and even the store manager were all brought into the office to discuss the situation. The incident was just the beginning of a larger shift. As the day progressed, news of the CEO's actions spread, and the company underwent an internal overhaul. The young woman who had insulted him, now in tears, realized that the way she had treated the CEO was not just an isolated mistake, but a reflection of a larger issue within the company. The new CEO wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who would fight for respect, equality, and opportunity for everyone, starting with the people in his own stores. His decision would spark a change that would resonate throughout his company, affecting not just employees, but customers too. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to make a spectacle. All he needed was to take action, and that action would send a message that no one would forget. As the CEO sat back down at his table, he couldn't shake the words that had just been said to him. "You don't belong here." It wasn't the first time he had heard something like that, but it always stung. He thought back to his younger years, to the countless times he had been overlooked, dismissed, or treated as though he didn't deserve the same opportunities as others. But this time, it was different. This time, he was not just another person being judged by his appearance. He was the owner of this company, and he couldn't let this pass. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before picking up his phone. The call to his assistant, Carla, was brief but to the point. "Start Protocol 6. It's time to act." Carla responded immediately. "Yes, sir. I'm already on it. We're prepared for this." As he sat there, his mind raced. He had built this empire with his own blood, sweat, and tears. This was his company, his vision, and yet, here he was, being judged as if he were just another person walking into a store. He thought about how many others like him had been subjected to the same treatment. How many people of color had been treated as less than, despite their accomplishments, despite their success. He thought about the millions of dollars he had invested to make his company a leader in the industry, and yet, here he was, fighting for his place in it. As the minutes ticked by, he could feel the tension in the room rise. The staff continued to go about their business, unaware of what was unfolding just a few tables away. The barista who had insulted him had returned to the counter, chatting with a colleague, unaware of the gravity of what she had just done. The young woman who had made the comment still had no idea who she had spoken to. The CEO stood up from his table and walked toward the counter. His footsteps were steady, calculated. The employees behind the counter looked up as he approached, a sense of unease settling in the air. They didn't know what was coming, but they could feel it. The CEO looked at the barista, who was still busy preparing orders, and then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I own this place," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. The barista froze, her hands trembling slightly as she turned to face him. The recognition in her eyes was instant. She had just insulted the CEO of the company she worked for. The color drained from her face, but she didn't know how to respond. "I need to speak with the manager," he continued. The manager, a middle-aged man, emerged from the back room, his expression neutral. He had no idea what was happening, but when he saw the CEO standing there, his demeanor shifted slightly. The CEO turned to him. "I've just been told I don't belong here," he said, his voice unwavering. "By one of your employees." The manager looked between the CEO and the barista, his eyes widening. He didn't know how to react. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know." The CEO cut him off. "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for action. I want this addressed immediately." The manager nodded, his face reddening as he turned to the staff behind the counter. "Take care of this," he ordered, his voice shaky. The CEO watched as the staff scrambled, the tension in the room palpable. He didn't need to say anything else. The message was clear. This kind of behavior would not be tolerated in his company. As the barista was escorted to the back, the CEO took a seat near the counter, his coffee now cold in front of him. He looked around the cafe, watching the other customers as they went about their business. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to reflect on how far he had come. He thought about all the sacrifices, the challenges, and the setbacks. But more than anything, he thought about how much further he had to go. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about creating a culture of respect, a culture where everyone, no matter their background, was treated with dignity. As the minutes passed, the barista was brought back out, her face flushed with embarrassment. She stood in front of him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to disrespect you." The CEO looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He had no interest in hearing her apology. He had heard enough empty apologies in his life. What mattered now was what came next. This company is about respect, he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of his words. It's about giving people a chance, no matter who they are or where they come from. If you can't respect that, then you won't be a part of this company. Do you understand? The barista nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. The CEO didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The point had been made. This wasn't just about a single instance of disrespect. It was about changing the culture of his company, about setting a standard that would never again be compromised. As the CEO left the coffee shop, he felt a sense of resolve wash over him. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready to take the first step. He would no longer allow anyone to be treated less than. He would be the change he wanted to see. And that change would ripple through his company, creating a future where respect and equality were the foundation of everything they did. The CEO left the coffee shop with a sense of determination building inside him, but his mind was still racing. This small confrontation, while significant, was just the tip of the iceberg. As he walked down the street, he couldn't help but reflect on everything he had fought for over the years, and the journey he had been on to get to this point. He thought about how many times he had been underestimated, how many times people had assumed he didn't belong because of the color of his skin. It wasn't just the coffee shop incident that had triggered him. It was the culmination of years of systemic discrimination he had faced. He had worked hard to get to this point, to build his company from the ground up, and yet it still wasn't enough to escape the prejudice that was ingrained in society. He knew that something had to change, not just within the walls of his company, but within the broader world around him. As he walked, he reached for his phone and made another call to Carla. "I need a meeting with the executive team," he said firmly. "We need to discuss the way we're handling discrimination and how we're addressing it internally. This isn't just about one person or one mistake. This is a company-wide issue, and it's time we did something about it." Carla responded immediately, "I'll set it up. I'll have everyone ready in an hour." The CEO nodded, his steps now more purposeful as he made his way to his car. He had always been a man of action, but this was different. This was bigger than him. This was about the future of his company and the culture he wanted to build. As he sat in his car, his mind raced with thoughts of the changes he needed to make. The coffee shop incident was just one of many, and he had seen it all before. People of color being treated as less than, being dismissed, being told they didn't belong. The problem wasn't just in the coffee shop, it was everywhere. It was in the way people were treated. In meetings, in the way they were spoken to, in the way they were hired and promoted. It was time to confront it head-on. As he entered the building, he was greeted by Carla, who led him to the boardroom where the executive team was waiting. The room was quiet, the weight of the situation settling in. Everyone knew why they were there. The CEO stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding attention. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We have a problem," he began, his voice steady but filled with authority. "A problem that goes beyond the coffee shop, beyond a single incident. It's a problem that runs deep within our company, and it's time we faced it. We are a company built on values, respect, inclusion, and opportunity for all. But we've failed to uphold those values. We've allowed systemic discrimination to exist within our walls, and that ends today." The room remained silent as the CEO's words hung in the air. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the pressure to take action. But he wasn't backing down. "We need to make changes, big changes. It starts with our hiring practices, our training, and most importantly, our accountability. We cannot allow people to be treated unfairly based on the color of their skin, their gender, or any other factor. We need to build a culture that reflects the values we claim to hold. That means holding people accountable when they fail to live up to those values, no matter their position within the company." The team listened intently, some of them nodding in agreement, others looking uncertain. The CEO knew it wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But he was determined to make it happen. "I'm not asking for a surface-level change," he continued. "I'm asking for real, meaningful action. This is not just a diversity initiative. This is about creating a culture of respect and inclusion that runs deep within our organization. This is about making sure that every single employee feels valued and heard. And if we can't do that, then we are failing." The room remained quiet for a moment, but then one of the senior executives spoke up. We agree, she said. This is a serious issue, and we are ready to take action. What do you need from us? The CEO nodded, grateful for her support. I need a full audit of our practices, starting with our hiring and promotion processes, he said. We need to identify where we're failing, where we've allowed bias to creep in. And then we need to implement a plan to fix it, immediately. We will be transparent with our employees and our customers about the changes we're making. We will hold ourselves accountable, and we will not stop until we've built the company we promised to be. The team nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of the situation. The CEO knew this was just the beginning, but it was an important first step. He was determined to make his company a place where everyone truly belonged, no matter their background. He wasn't going to let one incident define the future of his company. It was time to take a stand, for his employees, for his customers, and for himself. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and intense discussions. The CEO had set his plan into motion. Carla and the executive team worked tirelessly to launch the audit of the company's hiring and promotion practices, and within a week, they had gathered enough data to reveal the extent of the problem. It was worse than he had imagined. The discrimination wasn't just happening in one department or one location. It was systemic, deeply ingrained in the culture of the company. He couldn't ignore it any longer. It was time to act. The CEO called another meeting with the team. As they gathered in the boardroom, there was a palpable tension in the air. The weight of the situation had settled on everyone's shoulders, but it was clear that the urgency of the moment was driving them all forward. The CEO walked in, his face calm but resolute. He looked at each of the executives, his eyes steady as he spoke. We've reviewed the data. We've seen the patterns, and we can no longer turn a blind eye to what's happening in our company. This isn't just about one or two isolated incidents. This is a cultural issue that runs deep, and it's time we fix it. No more excuses. No more delay. We are making systemic change, starting now. There was a brief silence as everyone processed his words. The room felt heavy, but the CEO's tone was unwavering. He had no time for hesitation. We will be implementing immediate changes. In our hiring practices, we will be instituting mandatory bias training for all employees, from the bottom to the top. And we will be holding everyone accountable for their actions. We will not allow discrimination to exist in any form in this company. If you can't support that, then you need to leave now. The room was still, and then one of the senior executives, a woman who had been with the company for over 20 years, spoke up. We agree, she said, her voice steady. We've been blind to the problem for too long, and it's time we do something about it. But this needs to come from the top. We need your leadership to show us the way. The CEO nodded. I'm ready. This is my responsibility, and I will lead by example. We will be transparent with our employees and our customers about the steps we're taking. We will be open about our progress and our setbacks. If we fail, we will admit it. But we will not stop until we've created a company where everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background, is treated with respect and dignity. The next few weeks were filled with meetings, training sessions, and difficult conversations. The CEO personally led the first round of mandatory bias training, speaking to employees at every level of the company. He shared his own experiences with discrimination, telling them how it had shaped his life and his work. He knew that this was the right thing to do, not just for his company, but for society as a whole. He had always believed that businesses had a responsibility to lead by example, and now he was living that belief. As he walked through the halls of his company, he saw the changes starting to take root. Employees were more engaged, more motivated, and more aware of the impact their actions had on others. He felt a sense of pride in what they were building together. But he also knew that there would always be challenges ahead. The fight against discrimination wasn't something that could be won overnight. It would require constant effort, constant reflection, and constant action. But as the CEO looked around at his company, he knew they were on the right path. And he was ready to lead them all the way to the end. Months passed, and the transformation within the company began to show noticeable results, though not without its challenges. The CEO continued to lead the charge for change, ensuring that the commitment to fairness, respect, and inclusion remained at the forefront of every decision. However, despite the positive strides they were making, there were still moments that tested their resolve. One morning, As the CEO walked into the headquarters, he felt a familiar sense of anticipation mixed with determination. There were still hurdles ahead, but he was no longer alone in his mission. The employees, the ones who had been skeptical at first, were now more involved and invested in the company's transformation. He had created a space where people felt empowered to speak up, to share their experiences, and to hold each other accountable. The CEO entered the conference room, where a meeting was already underway. His executive team sat around the table, reviewing the latest employee feedback and discussing the next steps for the company's diversity and inclusion initiatives. As he took his seat at the head of the table, he could feel the energy in the room shift. It was a different atmosphere now, a more open, collaborative one. Carla, his assistant, had done an incredible job ensuring that the audits were being carried out and that the necessary changes were being implemented. He nodded to her as she looked up and gave him a reassuring smile. "Good morning, everyone," the CEO began, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "I wanted to start today by thanking each and every one of you for your hard work. This company has come a long way, but we know we still have much to do. We've made progress, but we can't stop now. Our mission to create a truly inclusive and equitable environment must remain at the heart of everything we do. So, I want to hear from all of you. What's working? What's not working?" One of the senior executives spoke up. "The training sessions have been effective, but we've noticed that there are still some departments where employees are hesitant to fully embrace the changes. It's clear that some of them are struggling to unlearn ingrained biases. We need to find a way to support them better." The CEO listened intently, nodding in agreement. "You're right," he said. "This isn't going to be easy. It's going to take time for some people to truly change their mindset. But we can't afford to let this slide. We need to continue pushing for progress, even when it feels uncomfortable. Every level of the company must be committed to this, and that starts with leadership setting the example." The conversation continued, diving deeper into the ways they could strengthen the accountability structures within the company. The CEO was committed to ensuring that the progress they had made wasn't just a temporary fix. It needed to be sustainable, built into the very fabric of the company culture. He knew that the true test of their success would come over time. He had learned through his own experiences that change couldn't be rushed. It had to be earned and maintained. As the meeting drew to a close, Carla handed the CEO a folder containing the results of the most recent employee survey. He opened it, scanning the responses. It was clear that the employees were noticing the changes, and many expressed gratitude for the company's renewed focus on inclusion and fairness. But there were still concerns. There were still people who felt the old ways lingering beneath the surface, and the CEO knew that addressing those lingering biases would require more than just words. It would require action, consistency, and a deep commitment to doing what was right. "Carla," the CEO said, closing the folder, "please schedule a company-wide town hall next week. We need to be transparent with everyone about where we stand and what comes next. I want to answer their questions, listen to their concerns, and make it clear that we are in this together. We are not done, but we will get there." As he walked out of the room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The road ahead would be long, but the foundation for real change had been laid. He knew that he couldn't do this alone. That was why it was so important to build a team that was as committed as he was. They were all in this together, working toward a future where every employee had an equal opportunity to thrive. The CEO had always believed in the power of hard work and determination, but now he believed in something greater, the power of collective action. Together, they would rewrite the story of the company, and together, they would ensure that no one was ever told again that they didn't belong. The town hall meeting was scheduled for the following week, and as the day approached, the CEO's anticipation grew. He had been through countless meetings and presentations in his career, but this was different. This wasn't about business metrics or quarterly profits. This was about something much more profound, transforming the very core of his company. He had spent the last several months working to change the culture, to address the ingrained biases and discrimination that had plagued the organization for far too long. But now was the time to face the employees directly, to be transparent, to hear them, to let them know that this wasn't just another corporate initiative. This was personal. This was about their future. The CEO stood in front of the large crowd, his heart beating steadily in his chest. His hands were at his sides, and his voice was calm, yet it carried with it the weight of everything he had worked for. The room was filled with employees from every department, gathered together in the company's main auditorium. Carla stood off to the side, ready to assist as needed. There was a sense of anticipation in the air. The employees were quiet, their eyes fixed on the CEO. They had been waiting for this moment. The CEO took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "I've asked you all to gather here today because I want to have an honest conversation with you. We've been making some changes, but I know we still have a long way to go. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us, our culture, our values, and how we treat each other every day." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. He could feel the weight of their gazes, but it only fueled his determination. He had made a promise to himself and to his employees that things would change, and now was the time to show them what that looked like. "As I've said before," he continued, "we've seen the data, and we've heard the stories. We know there's work to be done, and I want to be clear about one thing. This is not just another diversity initiative. This is about changing the very DNA of this company. This is about creating a place where everyone, no matter their background, no matter their race, no matter their gender, feels respected and valued. A place where no one will ever be told they don't belong." There was a shift in the room. The employees were listening, really listening. The CEO could feel it. He could see it in their eyes, the skepticism, the hope, the desire for change. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but this was the moment that would define his company moving forward. "The changes we've made so far are just the beginning," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We've overhauled our hiring practices, we've implemented new training programs, and we've begun holding people accountable for their actions. But this is just the first step. We need to do more. We need to be proactive. We need to create an environment where this kind of discrimination is not just addressed, but completely eradicated." The room was silent for a moment, and then someone in the crowd spoke up. It was a woman from the marketing department. "How do we know this time it will be different? We've heard this before. We've seen these initiatives come and go. What's going to make this time different?" The CEO looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering. "You're right," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We've failed before. We've promised change and then let it slip away. But this time, it's different because I'm here to stay committed to this. We're holding ourselves accountable, and we're doing the hard work to make sure it's sustainable. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We're in this together." The woman nodded, and a few others in the room began to murmur in agreement. The atmosphere was shifting from skepticism to cautious optimism. The CEO knew that this was just the beginning. The real work was going to take years, but this moment, this conversation, was an essential part of that journey. "The road ahead won't be easy," he said, his tone serious. "We'll face setbacks. We'll face resistance. But we will keep moving forward. We will keep learning, and we will keep growing. And when we make mistakes, we will own up to them. We will not be afraid to do what's right, even if it's difficult." The room was still, and then a slow clap started in the back of the room. It spread like wildfire as employees from every department began clapping in unison. The CEO stood tall, a small smile crossing his face as he looked around the room. It wasn't applause for him. It was applause for the future they were building together. It was applause for the change that was already underway. And for the first time, he felt like they were truly on the path to something better, something real, something that would last. As the clapping subsided, the CEO turned to Carla, who gave him a thumbs up. The town hall had been a success, but the work was far from over. It was only the beginning. The next phase of their journey had just started, and the CEO was ready to lead them all the way through. Weeks passed since the town hall meeting, and the CEO could see the first signs of change in his company. There was a newfound energy in the air. Employees were more engaged, conversations were more open, and the atmosphere had begun to shift towards inclusivity. But despite these positive steps, there was still much work to be done. The CEO had made it clear that he was committed to creating lasting change, but the reality was that transforming a corporate culture was never easy. He had to stay vigilant, ensuring that the progress made wasn't just surface level, but deeply rooted in every part of the organization. One afternoon, as he sat in his office reflecting on the progress they had made, Carla entered with a folder in hand. "The latest survey results are in," she said, setting the folder down in front of him. "It's a mixed bag. Some departments are making strides, but there are still pockets of resistance. The CEO opened the folder and scanned the results. There were encouraging signs. More employees felt that they were being treated fairly, and the company's new diversity and inclusion initiatives were gaining traction. However, there were still several departments where employees felt that the changes hadn't reached them. Some employees were skeptical, unsure whether the leadership's commitment to change would last. The CEO closed the folder, deep in thought. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he said. "But we need to make sure we are reaching every corner of this company. We can't afford to leave anyone behind." Carla nodded in agreement. "I'll schedule a follow-up meeting with the department heads. We need to address this resistance head-on and make sure everyone is on board with the vision." The CEO stood up from his desk and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. He had worked so hard to get to this point, and he wasn't about to let complacency take hold. He had promised change, and he was going to see it through. But it wasn't just about policies and training. It was about changing hearts and minds, about creating a culture where respect and equality weren't just buzzwords, but lived experiences. He turned back to Carla. "Set up the meeting. Let's bring in the heads of those departments and find out what's holding them back. We need to make sure they understand the importance of what we're doing and why it matters not just for the company, but for them personally." Over the next few days, the CEO met with the leaders of the resistant departments, listening to their concerns and addressing their doubts. Some were hesitant about the changes, worried that it would disrupt the established order or make people uncomfortable. Others felt that the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion was just a passing trend, something that would fade once the spotlight moved elsewhere. But the CEO knew better. He had lived through the challenges of being underestimated, of being treated as less than. He had seen firsthand the power of inclusion, of creating an environment where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. During these meetings, he shared his personal story with the department heads. He spoke about the challenges he had faced in his career, the countless times he had been judged by the color of his skin instead of his abilities. He talked about the importance of representation, of seeing people who looked like him in positions of power, and how that had shaped his vision for the company. He wasn't just asking them to make changes for the sake of it. He was asking them to believe in something bigger, something that would benefit everyone in the long run. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were moments of tension. Some leaders were more receptive than others, but the CEO remained patient and determined. He wasn't going to let them off the hook. If they wanted to be part of this company, they needed to understand the responsibility they had to create a space where everyone felt valued. By the end of the week, the CEO had seen a shift. More department heads were on board, and the resistance was starting to fade. It wasn't gone, but the conversation had started. The commitment to change was no longer just a top-down initiative. It was a shared goal that everyone could get behind. The CEO knew that they still had a long road ahead, but this was a victory. He had proven that leadership wasn't just about giving orders. It was about listening, understanding, and leading with empathy. As he left the office that evening, the CEO felt a sense of accomplishment. He had made progress, but there was still much work to be done. Tomorrow would be another day, another opportunity to continue the work of building a more inclusive and equitable company. And he was ready, because he knew that the journey they were on was worth it, not just for him, but for every person who walked through the doors of the company. Together, they would create something truly special. The CEO stood at the front of the room, looking out over the group of department heads and key leaders who had gathered for the next phase of the company's cultural transformation. The previous weeks had been filled with intense discussions and action, but now it was time to take things to the next level. He had pushed for accountability, for leadership to step up and embrace the changes, and now he needed to make sure that these changes were being felt at every level of the company. The room was quiet as the CEO addressed the group, his voice steady and unwavering. "We've come a long way, but let me make something clear. This is just the beginning," he said, locking eyes with each person in the room. "I've heard your concerns, I've listened to your feedback, and I know that the road ahead is going to be challenging. But we are not going to stop. We will continue to lead with purpose, and we will continue to hold ourselves accountable. It's time to take the next step." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "In the past few months, we've made significant strides, but we know that we still have pockets of resistance. We've heard from employees that there are still barriers, still biases that need to be addressed. We can't afford to ignore that. We need to dig deeper and find out what's really going on. We need to make sure that every department, every individual in this company feels that they are part of a culture that truly values them, that truly supports them. The CEO could see the resolve in the room. These were the leaders who were going to carry the message forward, who were going to make sure the company was moving in the right direction. But he also knew that true transformation required more than just top-down leadership. It had to be embedded in every part of the organization, from the highest executive to the newest employee. I want to hear from each of you, he said. I want to know what you think we're doing right, but also what we're still missing. Don't hold back. We need to hear the truth so that we can keep pushing for progress. One by one, the department heads began to speak. Some shared their successes, the initiatives that had worked, and the positive feedback they had received from employees. Others spoke candidly about the challenges they were still facing, the resistance from certain teams, and the subtle biases that were still affecting how people were treated. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The CEO nodded thoughtfully as each leader spoke, acknowledging both the victories and the setbacks. When the last person finished, he stood up and addressed the group once more. I appreciate your honesty, he said. It's not easy to face these truths, but it's the only way we're going to get better. This is why we're here. To make sure that no one is left behind. To make sure that we are building a company that truly reflects our values. The CEO's mind was already racing with ideas, action plans, and next steps. It was clear that the company needed to continue pushing forward with their initiatives, but it also needed to look inward, at how the leadership itself could model the behavior they expected from others. I want each of you to think about how you're going to lead this change within your teams. It's not just about policies and programs. It's about how we treat each other every day. It's about creating a space where people feel safe, respected, and empowered to speak up. We have to model this behavior ourselves. If we don't, no one else will follow. As the meeting ended, the CEO felt a sense of purpose settling over him. This wasn't just about hitting metrics or reaching a milestone. It was about something deeper, something more lasting. He was building a company that would stand as a beacon for what was possible when people came together with a shared vision of respect, equality, and opportunity. He knew there would be setbacks along the way. It wouldn't always be easy, but he was committed to the cause, and he was going to continue fighting for it. As he walked out of the room, he felt the weight of his responsibility, but also a renewed sense of hope. This was the work that mattered, and he was going to lead it with everything he had. Together, they would continue to make progress, one step at a time. Months passed since that pivotal meeting, and the CEO could feel the transformation within the company slowly taking root. The changes had been more than just cosmetic. They were becoming a part of the company's DNA. Yet, as the landscape began to shift, the work was far from finished. He had come to understand that cultural change was not a sprint. It was a marathon that required consistent effort, reflection, and above all, commitment. As the CEO moved through his daily routines, meeting with employees, reviewing progress, and addressing setbacks, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The journey wasn't easy, and there had been moments of doubt, but the determination to build a truly inclusive and equitable company remained unwavering. One afternoon, as he sat in his office reviewing the latest diversity and inclusion reports, Carla entered with a sense of urgency in her step. She had a folder in hand, and her face looked serious. We've had some feedback from the latest employee survey, and there are some results that we need to address right away, she said, setting the folder down in front of him. The CEO leaned forward, his expression serious as he opened the folder and scanned through the data. The report showed that while there had been significant progress in terms of diversity and representation, there were still areas of concern. Employees in certain departments felt that the company's commitment to inclusion was not being fully implemented in practice. Some employees still felt marginalized, and there were reports of subtle, persistent biases that hadn't been fully addressed. The CEO's mind raced as he processed the information. He knew that change couldn't happen overnight, but he was also acutely aware that if they didn't address these remaining issues, they could undermine everything they had worked for. Carla, he said, closing the folder, we need to act quickly. I want to meet with the department heads again. We need to dig deeper, and we need to be honest about the challenges we're still facing. We can't let complacency take over. Carla nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll arrange the meeting right away," she said, before leaving the room to get started. The CEO spent the next few days preparing for the meeting, reviewing the survey data, and thinking about the best approach to address the issues head-on. He knew that the conversation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. He had always believed that real leadership meant confronting difficult truths, not avoiding them. When the day of the meeting arrived, he entered the room with Carla and the department heads, all of whom were expecting a straightforward discussion about the progress they had made. But the CEO knew it was time to be blunt. "Thank you all for joining me today," the CEO began, his voice steady but firm. "I've seen the progress we've made, and I'm proud of the work we've done. But we have a problem, and it's something that cannot be ignored. The feedback from our employees is clear. Despite our efforts, there are still areas where we are falling short. Some of our employees feel that the changes we've implemented are not enough, and there are still biases that exist within our company." The room was quiet as the department heads absorbed his words. The CEO continued, "We can't afford to ignore these concerns. We have to dig deeper and understand what is still holding us back. I need each of you to reflect on what you can do differently. We're not just going to implement policies and check off boxes. We need real, sustainable change, and it starts with us." There was a brief silence before one of the senior leaders spoke up. "We've made changes to our hiring and promotion practices, but I think we need to focus more on the day-to-day interactions within our teams. It's the small moments, the microaggressions, the assumptions that people make, that we're missing. We need to create a culture where everyone feels like they belong, not just at the top, but across the board." The CEO nodded, acknowledging the validity of the concern. "You're right," he said. "We can't just focus on the big changes. We need to address the daily interactions, the culture that we're building in every meeting, every project, every conversation. We need to teach empathy and create an environment where people feel heard, seen, and valued, no matter their background." The conversation continued, with each department head offering their insights on how they could make those changes. The CEO listened attentively, asking questions and challenging assumptions. By the end of the meeting, they had a clearer action plan. Ongoing, in-depth training focused on empathy and understanding, better support systems for marginalized employees, and a renewed commitment to holding everyone in the company accountable for their actions. As the meeting concluded, the CEO felt a renewed sense of resolve. The road to true inclusion was long, but he knew they were on the right path. He wasn't expecting perfection, but he was expecting progress. He had learned over the years that real change didn't happen in one fell swoop. It happened incrementally, through consistent effort, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As he left the meeting, the CEO looked out the window of his office, watching the city below. It was a bright, sunny day, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. His company was on the edge of something transformative, but it would take time. And he was ready to lead the charge, with patience and persistence, knowing that together, they would build a company where everyone truly belonged.